One question that comes to the mind of every first-time home buyer is, does it make sense to buy a house or does it make sense to just keep staying on rent? Well, understandably, renting offers a lot of flexibility in that, say, you're very early on in your career and you don't know where your next switch would be. You would want to switch maybe every couple of years and you don't want location to be of a constraint, then obviously renting is the only option. It will also help that you don't have this whole burden of an EMI on you so early on in your career. But what if you've kind of settled and you know that for the next 10, 15 or 20 years you're not going to move anywhere? In that case, does it still make sense to, keep staying on rent, or does it make sense then to go ahead and buy a house? We look at some examples, we look at some numbers, and maybe that'll help. So stay tuned.
Let's take the example of two friends, Akash and Bhuvan. Assume they are very similar in what they do and how they've been earning. So let's say they're staying in a tier 1 city, for example, say Mumbai or Delhi. They're 32 years of age and they're earning around 25 lakhs per annum. So they're doing pretty well over there. The savings as of now is around 30 lakhs, which is again pretty good. And they're staying in the same neighborhood in similar houses and they're staying on rent. So assume that they are paying a monthly rent of rupees 30,000 for a house which is worth 1.5 crore. Now here one thing to notice, and we'll come to this a little later in this video, is the ratio between the rent and the house. So if you look at this, they're paying 30,000, so that's a yearly rent of around 3,60,000 for a house that is worth 1.5 crore. So the percentage over there is kind of 2.4% of the net worth. So they're paying their yearly rent is 2.4% of the worth of the house. All right, moving ahead, and assume this they're living there for the past 5 years. Now, Akash, when he was going through his, spending patterns and just checking where he's spending all this money, he just realized that he's been spending way too much money on rent. So the rent that was around 22,500 5 years ago has now gone up to 30,000, and it just keeps going higher and higher. So then he kind of decided that maybe it makes sense to just go ahead and buy this house. So what he does is he goes to the bank, and the bank is very happy to offer him a loan of 1.2 crores based on his income, his age, and basic credit score. Once that is approved, all that he has to do is a down payment of rupees 30 lakhs, which he already has in his savings. So, just for the sake of simplicity, all the savings may not be liquid, but we'll just assume that he's managed to bring up 30 lakhs with the help of maybe some other personal loan or maybe from family or friends. So there you go. Now he pays this 30 lakhs as down payment, and now he has this house all to himself. But the problem that he has is he has an EMI of around 92,000 that he has to pay for the next 30 years. And now this EMI is calculated assuming that the loan is for 30 years, but if it was for a different duration, we might have a different EMI, and we'll get to that in a moment. Uh, Now let's compare how these two are doing. So Akash is bought this house on loan. Bhuvan is doing nothing. So he's just basically continuing living the way he used to. So he's still staying on rent. In the year zero, basically at the time that Akash bought this house, he's paid this down payment amount of 30 lakhs from his savings, and Bhuvan has this savings untouched. So all of this 30 lakhs is just there in his savings, and it is just he's getting interest on it every year. So that amount is available for investments for Bhuvan. In the first year, Akash is paid an effective EMI of 10.5 lakhs, and this we are still assuming that the loan is for 30 years. So he's paying an effective EMI of 10.5 lakh rupees for that particular year. Effective EMI here is basically the EMI that he spent minus all the tax benefits that he's got because of the home loan. Bhuvan is paid an effective rent of 2.9 lakhs that for that 1 year, and again your effective rent is basically the rent that he's paid minus the tax benefits he's got because of the rent he's paying. So the difference is 7.6 lakhs here, and that amount is a surplus with Bhuvan, and that he can use to invest. So assume he's investing in good investment options, and he's getting a pretty decent ROI for that. In the second year, the EMI for Akash remains similar, so it's still 10.5 lakhs. But for Bhuvan, now the rent has increased slightly to 3.1 lakhs, and that is basically because, as you would assume that the rent keeps increasing every year because of inflation. So now his rent has increased from 2.9 lakhs to 3.1 lakhs, and the difference is still significant, but it is reduced a little bit. So it is 7.4 lakhs now, but again he can go and invest this amount at somewhere else. Going ahead, say in the year 25, what happens is after 25 years, the effective EMI for Akash is still 10.5 lakhs, but now the effective rent for Bhuvan because of inflation is 13.8 lakhs. And now Akash is actually spending lesser money than Bhuvan for the house he's owning. And he has a difference of 3.3 lakhs that Akash can now go in and invest. So we're just making it simpler. So we're just assuming that all the difference that just comes out, they are investing in good investment instruments. At the end of year 30, Akash is done with his EMI. So he's paid 10.9 lakhs as the effective EMI. And the effective EMI is a little higher over here because the tax benefits will be a little lower. So he's paid 10.9 lakhs, but now he's got the home all to himself. And there is Bhuvan, whose effective rent now is 9.4 lakhs, and the difference is 8.5 lakhs in the favor of Akash. So he can go and invest that. But it is a final year, so we'll just stop at that. So he has 8.5 lakhs as the surplus. Let's look at how we got those numbers, and does it make sense to what is the overall result of this. So just to go through their profile, we are assuming that both of them have a basic salary of 12 lakhs, and so hence they come in the tax slab of 30% as of now. And we are assuming that the yearly increment in their salary would be 10%. So we said earlier that they're earning 25 lakhs, out of which maybe their basic salary is around 12 lakhs. And that'll come into picture because that is the basis on which your house rent allowance and how much tax benefit you're going to get out of it depends on. Okay, so we are talking of the case of Akash, who's bought the house. The cost of the house was 1.5 crores. Down payment was 30 lakhs. Loan was 80% of it, so that's 1.2 crores. We are assuming that the home loan interest rate is 8.5% and the period is 30 years here, and hence the EMI comes to 92,000. So as you can see, I've put formulas everywhere. So I'd probably just put this sheet in the description. You can go ahead and play around it. So you can put in whatever relevant values you want based on your case. And we are assuming here that the cost of the appreciation in the house, and the cost of the house would be 8%. So every year the value of the house will increase by 8%. So what that does is at the end of our 30-year period, which you're considering, the value of the house goes up to 15 crores. And on the other hand, Bhuvan has been renting, right? So Bhuvan is paying a monthly rent of 30,000. We are assuming that the inflation is 6%, and we are hence assuming that his rent again goes up by that much amount. So that is how he ends up with a very high rent at the later part of the 30-year period. We are assuming that the interest rate on investment is 12%. So assuming he puts a lot of money in good mutual funds or direct stocks, and he gets a yearly return on investment of 12%. Now that being said, remember we had said that the down payment of 30 lakhs has gone from Akash's savings, but is still remaining in Bhuvan savings. So that particular 30 lakhs, the value of that 30 lakhs at the end of a 30-year period, having a return on investment of 12% per year, would come to just below 9 crores. And then we've already seen that most of the years Bhuvan was paying lesser rent than Akash. Sorry, Bhuvan's rent was much lower than Akash's EMI. So that difference, again, assuming that he's going to invest in good investment instruments, that too will give him good return on investments. And And yeah, that amount would come to 12 crores 85 lakhs at the end of 30 years. So at the end of 13 years, the total value of investments for Bhuvan is around 21.8 crores. So as you can see, the if everything else remains the same, Bhuvan ends up with a value of 21.8 crores, and it's sitting in his savings account or in his investment portfolio. And Akash is sitting with a house worth 15 crores. So the savings that Akash has by buying the house is actually negative. So in this case, we see that Bhuvan is sitting on a higher net worth at the end of 30 years, and his net worth is 6.75 crores more than what Akash's net worth is. So in this particular case, renting makes more sense than buying. We look at how we arrived at these numbers in a little more detail. So this is the first column says the year 1 through 30. The second column is the EMI that Akash is paying since he's decided to buy the house. So the EMI remains constant, so it is 11 lakhs every year. But if you look at the next two columns, it says what proportion of this EMI goes into the principal and what proportion goes as interest. So in the first year, only 90,000 goes into the principal, and the rest around 10 more than 10 lakhs goes as interest. And every following year, the principal amount increases and the interest amount decreases. And at the end of in the last year, the 30th year, your principal amount or the contribution towards principal will be very high, and interest will be pretty negligible. Now, the tax benefit on the interest is what Akash can benefit. So he'll have to pay that much lesser tax. And as of the current policies, tax benefit is applicable to up to 2 lakhs of interest. So the tax that you pay for 2 lakhs comes to 60,000 because Akash is in the 30% tax bracket. So 60,000 will he'll have a gain of 60,000 on his net tax. So the effective payment is basically the amount that he's paid as EMI, which is 11 lakhs, minus the 60,000 which he's got as tax benefit. So that is what he's paying every year effectively. And in the final year, this effective payment will go a little higher because the tax benefit is a little lower. Now, this from here we are looking at Bhuvan. So Bhuvan is paying a yearly rent of 3.6 lakhs for the first year, and that goes up by 6% is what we are saying because it matches inflation. And at the end of 30th year, he's paying 19.5 lakhs. His basic salary is 12 lakhs in the first year, and that increases by 10% every year. The tax benefit on rent is calculated as the actual rent paid minus 10% of the basic. So the actual rent paid over here is 3.6 lakhs. 10% of his basic is 1.2 lakhs. So the difference between that is 2.4 lakhs, and the tax benefit or the tax that he would ideally pay on 2.4 lakhs is 72,000. So that is reduced on his tax burden. So basically, he'll have to pay 72,000 lesser tax that year. So that is a tax benefit that Bhuvan gets because he's staying on rent. And this tax benefit increases till a point of time. And then if you look at it in the later years, it reduces again. And the reason for that is his basic salary is increasing at a much higher rate than the rent he's paying. And we're just making this assumption, but we are assuming that his basic salary increases by 10% and the rent is increasing only by 6%. So after a point of time, the actual rent paid minus 10% of his basic salary would be a pretty small amount, and that is why the tax benefit is that much lesser. And the effective rent is as we had earlier said, the total rent paid minus the benefit that he gets on his tax. So this is the effective rent that Bhuvan is paying every year. The difference is the difference between these two, the effective payment by Akash and the effective rent. And again, here as we saw earlier, after a point of time, Bhuvan would be paying more rent than what Akash is paying on his EMI. So here in this case, Bhuvan is paying 12 lakhs as rent when Akash is still paying around 10.5 lakhs as his effective EMI. And this is the difference. So this difference is then available for investments. If we are assuming that all of this amount Bhuvan is investing in certain mutual funds, so after a period of this 30-year period, this is the value that these investments will fetch. So if Bhuvan in the first year invests 7.59 lakhs, its value would be more than 2 crores at the end of the 30-year period. So basically, if you invest this amount for 29 years at a rate of interest of 12%, it comes to 2 crores. And similarly, say this amount for 28 years gives you 1.76 crores. The same is true for Akash as well. So here in this case, Akash can invest this surplus. So this 3,000, if Akash invests, he'll that will go up to 8%. Sorry, 8,000. But this here you have only say 8 or 9 years for it to compound. So that is why these amounts are much smaller. And but basically Akash can invest this amount on investments and get that get more profit than Bhuvan. But if you look at the total over here, this entire thing is the total value uh, that Bhuvan has at the end of the 30-year period. So that is the sum of 12.8 crores that we had written in this particular page. So that is how we got to this figure. So you have, you know, 30 lakhs invested for 30 years gives you around 9 crores, and the rest of the difference between the EMI and the rent amount invested for whatever period is remaining will give you this 12.8 crores, and that is how you get a final value of 21.88 crores. Now if you're wondering that this has got something to do with the 30-year EMI, so suppose Akash goes instead of 30 years he goes for a 20-year EMI. So what had happens, everything else remains the same. We assuming the same home loan interest, we assuming the same cost of appreciation, we are assuming the same inflation and interest and investments. So only thing that changes is the period of 20 years, and the EMI then is a lot more. So it is 1.04 lakhs from the first month onwards. Even here, after 20 years, you see that the value of the house is around 7 crores, and the value of the investments is still 8.24 crores. So here you see, and this we are looking at the end of the 20th year and not the 30th year. So here, even here, Bhuvan is kind of gaining more than Akash, and he has a higher net worth at the end of the 20th year, and he has 1.25 crore more than Akash at the end of the 20th year. So you can go through these. This is kind of similar calculations. So the columns are exactly the same. It's only the number of years that have reduced, and some calculations based on the number of the total payment and the principal and the interest. So everything else remains the same. But even in this case, you can see that renting over here makes more sense than buying the house.
As you can imagine, there are a bunch of factors that we've just assumed. We are assuming the rate of interest, inflation. We are assuming the rent will increase with respect to inflation. We are assuming you get 12% on your investments for the next 20, 30 years. So if any of these factors change, your calculations could change accordingly. But on the overall level, it'll still be better just keep staying on rent if you're staying in a metro. And the reason I say that is the most important criteria over here is the ratio between the rent and the actual value of the house. So we started off saying that the rent for this particular house is around 30,000 rupees per month as of now, and the actual cost is 1.5 crores. Now, if you look at the ratio of both of them, it is the rent comes to around 2.4% of your the actual total cost of the house, and that is the important factor. Now, when rent is a small amount in comparison to the actual value, it makes more sense to go and stay on rent. What if it was the other way around? If you're paying a higher percentage of rent, so if the rent on the house is say 4%, if your house is X amount, you're paying 4% of that amount as rent every year. So the 2.4% came from that, right? If you're paying 30,000 per month, it comes to 3,60,000 per year, and that is 2.4% of 1.5 crore. So we look at another example. Here we look at a non-metro, and let's look how the calculations come across in that case.
So here we are with two other friends, Charlie and David, and they are staying in a tier 2 city for example, say Bhopal or Trivandrum or Jaipur for that matter. And they are again 32 years of age. Their annual salary is 12 lakhs per annum. So yeah, it's a tier 2 city and they're okay with 12 lakhs per annum. The savings is around 10 lakhs. So much lower than the other friends that we saw. Again, they're staying in staying in the same neighborhood, similar houses. Monthly rent over here is 15,000 that they're paying for a house which is worth 50 lakhs. Now, here's the difference, right? Earlier, the ratio of the rent to the actual cost of the house was 2.4%. Now, here the rent is 15,000, so every year they're kind of spending 1.8 lakhs, which is 3.6% of the worth of the house, right? So that's the difference over here. Now let's see what happens. So Charlie, just like Akash in a previous example, thinks of buying a house. So he goes to the bank, he gets a loan of 40 lakhs, which is 80% of the value of the house, does a down payment of 10 lakhs from his savings, goes ahead and buys the house. And now he has this house of 50 lakhs and the EMI is 34,713 for 20 years. So we're just assuming 20 years over here, but you could do this for 30 years as well and it will give you kind of similar results. So let's look at the comparison between Charlie and David, as we just did for Akash and Bhuvan. So the down payment that Charlie did was 10 lakhs. That savings is untouched for David. So that is available for investments for this 20-year period. For the first year, Charlie spends 3.76 lakhs as effective EMI. David spends 1.56 lakhs as effective rent, similar to what we just saw earlier. The difference of 2.2 lakhs is available for David to go ahead and invest for 20 years, or for 19 years actually. Second year, it becomes 3.76 lakhs. Just go through this pretty quickly. So the rent increases by whatever 10%. So the difference is lower, but again, it's significant so that David can go ahead and invest it. For year 15, the effective EMI for Charlie is kind of similar, just a little higher because he gets lesser tax benefits. So it's 3.85 lakhs. David's rent has increased to 3.71 due to inflation. So the difference is 14K over year. Pretty marginal, but still David has some surplus. Year 20, that's when Charlie is done with his EMIs and then he'll have the house all to himself. He pays the effective EMI of 4.13 lakhs, and here David has an effective rent of more than 5 lakhs. The difference of around 96,000 is there for Charlie to be saved. All right, so let's look at our Excel sheet once again. All right, so here we are, and here this is the profile, right? So they are in the 20% income tax slab, basic salary of around 6 lakhs, and we are assuming similar percentages. So 10% yearly increment, you have 8.5% as a home loan interest, 8% of the house appreciation, 6% inflation, interest on investment is again 12%. When everything else remains the same, what you can see is finally the value of the house after 20 years is 2.3 crores, and that is there with Charlie. But here, David, he still went ahead and invested all the surplus. So he invested this 10 lakhs for 20 years, then he invested whatever surplus that he got for whatever years was remaining. All that put together still gets him to 1.97 crores. So here, actually, if you look at this, Charlie is now having higher net worth than David. So Charlie, by buying a house in this case, has actually gained amount. So that's the difference, right? So basically, when you just saw what you just saw is in some cases buying makes more sense, in some cases renting makes more sense. But the most important factor over here, and I've just taken metro and non-metro just as an example because that is what we typically find, where in metros the rent as a percentage of the cost is much lower, but in non-metros the rent as a percentage of the house could be higher. So in that case, so when the percentage of the rent is much higher, it makes more sense to go ahead and buy. But if the percentage of rent is much lower, it makes sense to just keep staying on rent. So this is the detailed calculation, exactly similar to what we had earlier. So these are the payments that Charlie is making. He's got some tax benefits. This is his effective payments. This is what David is doing. So he's paying rent, his basic salary, tax benefits, effective rent, the difference, and the difference is invested, and the sum of this entire column goes into goes here. So that is the value that David has at the end of 20 years. So here we see the difference, and in this case, you see by buying, Charlie has a net worth of 35 lakhs more than what David has at the end of 20 years. Now, if you think, we're increasing the house price by 8% and we are increasing the rent by only 6%, if that makes a difference, we can go ahead and change this to 8% just for the sake of argument. And there you see, in this case, because renting goes faster, the savings is higher when you're buying. But even in the earlier cases, suppose we move the 6 to say 8%, it still makes sense to go ahead and stay on rent than buying, because the savings by buying is negative over here. And even if you go for the 30-year plan and you change this to 8%, you still have a surplus. So basically, buying over here doesn't make too much sense, and it makes sense to just keep renting.
Having a look at these examples, one thing that stands out is the most differentiating factor, or the most important factor when you're considering whether to rent or to buy a house for yourself, is the percentage of money that you're going to pay as rent in comparison to the value of the house. So if the percentage of rent is say less than 2.5% or so, it makes sense to just keep staying on rent. If it is more than 3.5 or 4, then it makes sense to go and buy a house. Again, these are just guidelines. It's not very hard and fast rule, but in general, you can assume that that is a rule that you need to follow. Well, if you're wondering what I did, well, I kind of did both. I was staying in Mumbai in the earlier part of my career, and buying a house was kind of out of question. Real estate prices were really high, so I was staying on rent. And then a few years ago, I moved to Trivandrum, a tier 2 city, a non-metro. And here I was paying, as a percentage of the actual house, I was paying higher rent. So then within 1 year of moving to Trivandrum, I bought my own place and now I'm staying in my own house. So that is me. Whenever you're thinking of buying a house, please do check these numbers out. I'll put the link to the Excel in the description below. Please have a look at it. Whenever you want to check whether it makes sense to buy a house or not, have a look at your Excel, put in the values that are corresponding to you. As you can imagine, most of these values are formula based. So if you enter a value in certain cells, all of the cells get updated automatically. So change whatever is makes sense to you. If it changes tax slabs, if you think the value is different, the rent that you're paying currently is different, just go and change those values, and everything else will get reflected accordingly. So hope you like this video. If you like this video, please share it with your friends and relatives. Maybe it will help them as well. And please do give it a thumbs up. It will give me some encouragement in putting up some more content like this. So thank you and have a nice day.